Hello everyone, I'm Gigi Gordon, the Comms and Creative Manager at A New Normal, and today I'm joined by Ross Tilley from Bauer to talk about the power of one person. Could you introduce yourself please, Ross?
Hi Gigi, I'm Ross. I'm the commercial digital editor for Bauer in Northern Ireland. I also look after our LGBTQ plus pillar as part of our D&I initiative. And in 2020, I helped set up Hits Radio Pride. It's the UK's first digital commercial station from a major broadcaster.
Wow, that's amazing. What inspired you to start up that radio station?
It came out of it came out of a Pride event. So I'm based in Northern Ireland, and our culture is our culture. I do feel one of the team now. I've been here long enough. Northern Ireland is traditionally a place that has very strong moral values, and from our clients to our audiences. So the first time we took part in a Pride event was in 2019. And as cliched as it sounded, I created a Pride soundtrack and shared the playlist with colleagues. And I mean, I grew up listening to LGBTQ radio stations, but the music they played, I didn't feel really gelled with how I saw myself. I mean, there was a couple of stations that were in London called, was one called Purple Radio, and then there was Gaydar Radio, and both of them were very dance orientated, whereas actually I was more of a 5A1 Spice Girls person. So I never really fitted into that, and I always thought you needed to be a fan of dance music to be gay, because that's just what they played. And you know, surely if the station that's representing the community is not representing the community, then you know, maybe I'm in the wrong box. So when I thought about that, we've got a number of radio stations, national and local, across the whole of the UK, and all of our stations are involved slightly differently. So when we did the Pride event in 2019, I reached out to a couple of those stations, and I was expecting maybe one or two to come back and say, yeah, we got involved and here's how we did it. I wasn't expecting so many to come back and say, yes, we do this event, we do this Pride and this Pride. And I just thought there's just a huge amount of content here that's being produced across the whole of the UK. Wouldn't it be great to put it all in one place with the playlist that everybody really liked? And that's where it kind of came from. We had a management change in Northern Ireland, and our managing director for radio, Dee Ford, came over every couple of weeks during that time. And I just thought, I'm going to ask if the company's ever thought about launching a station like that. And she basically said, work it up. She loved the idea, and she wanted me to work it up. And 8 weeks later, I was sat in a boardroom in Leeds with the exec team. I think that process of going from it's a playlist to, you know, it's now actually a radio station was such a huge leap. Definitely not something that I thought was possible, but it really, I suppose it kind of woke me up into, you know, the power that you can have when you're speaking to people who are receptive, when you're, you know, working for a company that's open to ideas and that's really forward promoting those D&I values. And it, you know, it's just a fantastic experience to get to the point where we can go, you know, we're on air.
And had you ever done anything like that before?
Never. Like I say, the first time we got involved in Northern Ireland was in 2019. And, you know, Northern Ireland it has a lot of problems when it comes to acceptance in the LGBTQ plus community. And I never felt that it was appropriate necessarily for me to be the judge of what you know, what was considered okay, or what was considered, you know, talkable subjects on air, or, you know, connections to LGBTQ events and actions that are happening over here. You know, same-sex marriage wasn't even brought into Northern Ireland in 2019, and even then it was on a technicality. So there's still a very different culture over here, and I suppose bringing all that together and having an opportunity to have the company say, look, you know, this is something that we're really positive about, we really want to help bring stuff together, was just the perfect opportunity for it.
That's absolutely amazing, Ross. You must be so proud and happy.
So nervous though, so nervous. I think that's, you know, the being considered an activist, and being considered, you know, having that opportunity. I I never thought that I considered myself. I mean, I've never been to a Pride event. I mean, now I can kind of consider myself a professional homosexual because I have done the research that I had to help create the station. But you know, there's a whole world out there of people within those letters, those LGBTQ, and I fit into just one or two maybe of those boxes. And you know, trying to represent everybody is difficult, and that's why everybody has to put themselves forward, because they have to represent themselves. You know, I wear my pride on my sleeve. No, I'm very lucky. I work for a company that's really open and honest and really takes D&I activity seriously. And I think that kind of, you know, having that opportunity to shout that stuff and feel safe to shout that stuff means that it's easy to be an activist, because you're able to take it to every part of your life, not just the bits that you spend at home.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And I was just wondering, before you'd achieved all this, did you believe in the power of one person? Is it something that you'd kind of heard and thought maybe wasn't for you, or was it something that you felt probably was inside you? Like, how did you feel about that?
It goes back to that thinking of, you know, do I know enough about this to consider myself the right person to stand up and to try and lead it? So it almost goes back a step there. And you know, it starts with one person, but you know, the whole point about, especially with Hits Radio Pride, you know, the amount of people who work on that now and who have taken the mantle, you know, it may have started with me, but it lives on with everybody else. And I think that's kind of you know, being the first person to say it takes courage and nerve. I was petrified, but I always knew that from the response that I'd had when I'd initially spoken with our managing director, was so positive. I knew it would be received in a way that was you know, welcoming when it comes to, you know, the D&I messaging of launching a radio station that targets the community. But then obviously there's a business angle to it, and you know, being a company, so you know, the business can't, you know, just focus on that. You know, it has to feel part of what we do, has to function as a business. So I think, you know, the power of one starts with you, but sharing those ideas and letting people kind of take the mantle is the thing that really makes the difference. I'm not the type of person, you know, I kind of treat it as my baby. When we were launching it, when we were coming up with the ideas, you know, I felt really part of it, and I spent a lot of time looking into, you know, who do we want to listen to this station? Who should we be targeting? You know, why are we using a radio brand like Hits Radio to connect with the community? And you know, I was only able to give my view on what that was, and hope that what I saw was something that everyone else could too. You know, it could be been very easy for us to have decided that we were going to launch a new radio station and call it something completely different. But I know that from listening to those radio stations back in the 90s, that there almost needs to be a bridge, you know, somebody who's listening to Hits Radio, which is, you know, under 35 hit music radio station, local station across the country, across the network and through the brands. And that audience needed to feel like it wasn't a huge leap to get into Pride. So it wasn't just a personal thing, it was something that they shared. I mean, I don't think my parents would have listened to a radio station called Gaydar. I think that the jump would have been too far ahead for him. But I think everyone can celebrate Pride, and linking it to a brand like that kind of made it perfect. And I think taking it back to one person is that you have to have the plan. You have to feel confident in the situation that you're in. Know that however you're going to present this, you're going to present it from a good place. I have a positive impact. It's not always easy to feel comfortable doing that, but I definitely think it's worth the squeeze. What's that phrase? The juice is worth the squeeze. It's definitely worth doing it. Everything that's good in life deserves, it might take a little bit of a push, but you'll never regret doing it. You'll only ever regret not.
Oh, that's absolutely beautiful. I love that so much. For anybody who's listening who wants to make a difference in their community, what piece of advice would you give to them?
I think it would be to be open to other people's prejudices and misunderstandings. If I lived in London, I probably wouldn't see this. And that's why I kind of think that, in my role as LGBTQ pillar lead, our business has got a lot of offices outside of London. And the issues that affect us out in the communities are different to people who are LGBTQ working in an office in Soho. And I think, wherever you're trying to be involved, or whether you're trying to make a difference in your community, you have to appreciate that some people might not understand what you're trying to do and what you're trying to talk about. And there's a couple of occasions over the last couple of years where, especially in Northern Ireland, trying to explain what some of those terms mean, LGBTQ, IA plus, and all these, I genuinely think that some people out there might think we all get like a memo with the latest update for what all these letters mean. And it just, you need to ask those questions. If you don't understand what the Q means, or the I means, or any of the other letters, knowing that somebody can feel comfortable coming to you and asking what that is a big part of it. And I think, especially from an ally's perspective, if you can feel comfortable in coming up to somebody and saying, what does that mean? Making yourself approachable is a really big part of it, because there are genuinely generational gaps, cultural gaps, depending on where you are in the country. There are religious and political gaps. Those things are always going to be specifically tailored to the areas that they're in. And it's not always you're never going to get it right. But I've got family who they may not use what we would consider politically correct terms for race. There's no malice in there. It's just that they've never seen it used in the way that we might use it now. And to learn that those terms that they may have thought of previously have actually changed. I mean, the best one was trying to explain to my family that the word queer was a positive thing now. It's something that we've reclaimed it. And and the response from one of my family members was, well, what words are you going to claim next, and how do I know which one you've claimed? And it almost felt like they were expecting us to have an AGM to decide what the new letters were and what the meanings were. And it was just a case of, actually, you know what, this isn't that simple. It really isn't. The words that we might use now to describe someone who's trans, the words before might have been transsexual, and those types of phrasings, they're not used anymore, because we've come further away, and we're able to kind of understand gender in a deconstructed way, in personal, how that applies to an individual person rather than just to a letter as part of the community. And knowing that you've got the opportunity to go and ask the question, my godmother, bless her, she's 75. She has, I mean, we all call her Mrs. Bucket. She's like keeping up appearances, and she's a bit dyslexic. So she reads off the letters, and 9 times out of 10 it ends up with something like the BLTs, and it's there's no malice intended in that. It's just that she doesn't relate to the words in the same way that we do. And from my perspective, I felt good that I was able to help her connect with those words because she wasn't able, I know what this stands for, but what about this one? And, the word queer is something which, years ago was offensive, then it became provocative, queer as folk. And now it's a word which describes not just gay men, but an entire section of the community that don't identify with any of the other letters. And that was, funnily enough, one of the first things that we had a conversation about, I kind of brought up on Hits Radio Pride was, do we say that word on air? Does it feel like that's something that we should say just because, it didn't feel like it would flow naturally? And I think when the station launched, within the first 30 seconds, it was one of the first words that was used. And I just thought, well, yeah, how do people know that we're using that word in a positive way? Well, you need to hear it in a positive situation. And you couldn't have found a better way of discovering that than straight through the radio when you're listening to somebody on the station like that.
I think that's an amazing example of how powerful media is as well, and how
we have a responsibility. I mean, this is why. So when Hits Radio Pride first launched, there were two things that I really, really wanted to make sure we did properly. Where the station needed to have credibility. We actually needed to be able to live the values that we were putting out into the world. And I'm proud to say that the values that we have as a business match completely what we're trying to do externally. And what's been really nice to see being part of the D&I pillar is seeing our magazine and radio brands take those opportunities to share things like History Month, LGBT History Month, and Pride Month, and making social action campaigns make a difference in those situations. For Hits Radio Pride, that included a podcast series which looked at coming out, which again, really basic stuff. Everybody's had one of those stories, but the way they were told, the way that they the audiences that they reached, given our size and our scale, some people were hearing those for the first time. And in fact, in June, the moment, we are running a series called Faith, Sex and Me, which is a look at the intersectional crossover between religion and sex, because there are not a lot of things that the religions agree on, but they all agree that gays are wrong. So there's an awful lot of understanding there from not understanding how that fits. Does my religion think like that? Can I be religious and be gay or part of the community? And having that opportunity to share it, there's a real responsibility there, because I don't just want to reflect me, I want to reflect those other letters, but also people's voices in the communities. Northern Ireland and the Northeast have one of the highest male suicide rates in the UK. And the reasoning for that, the reasoning differs from person to person, but the way I feel that happens in Northern Ireland is that if you come out in Northern Ireland, you might upset your friends or your family, but in Northern Ireland, that's your whole community. That's your entire life. People over in Northern Ireland are so focused on community and family, and it's such a big part of their lives. So if they do feel that they don't identify as straight, then the risks that they feel they take are probably much higher than they would be if you were coming out in London or Manchester. So us as a broadcaster having the responsibility to be able to take that type of subject and to break it down so that it still feels like we are talking to that one person, but also their families who are hearing those things are able to understand the position that that person might be in as well.
That gave me shivers all over. And it reminded me of, I think I saw a stat recently that it's less than 1% of people actually know a trans person. And it reminds me of,
So sad.
I know, and that's why it makes me so angry when people are like, oh, it's just TV, like it's just the radio, it's not actually important, it's not real. I mean, radio is different obviously because it actually is real, but but I think it just, yeah, how important what you've done is. Like you must just feel so proud and so happy.
Do you know what I am proud. I mean, I listen. I listen to the station. Obviously, I listen, and I grew up. I'm a radio geek. I grew up. I love media. I love radio. I think it's powerful. I think it's it has the power for good, but it also has the power to harm as well. Sometimes that might not be intentional. The biggest part of that, like you're saying, when it comes to the trans community, the representation that's out there right now is limited. And that's something. We have a trans presenter on Hits Radio Pride, and she worked in commercial radio before, and she came back to commercial radio through Bauer and through Hits Radio Pride. And having that representation, we are so lucky. We are so lucky to be able to give our audience an opportunity to feel part of what's going on, that conversation. I mean, I really frustrated with Netflix recently, and I'm not one of these people who's going to write an email for no reason, but there were some comments that were made during performance from Ricky Gervais, and he made some completely and utterly inappropriate and moronic comments about members of the trans community. And what was frustrating to me was not that it was included. It almost felt like, the work that Netflix are doing with programs like Heartstopper, for goodness sake. I mean, such a well-represented show. There's a complete rainbow of people in it. And then sat next to that on the same TV guide is him making comments that, about genitalia. And I just thought to myself, you don't know the power that stuff is having. I mean, I don't know the full extent. I can't, but I know that sitting there hearing this stuff and hearing an entire audience of people laughing and almost giving license to the fact that they can laugh at that comment, and then they include it on a comedy stand-up performance. That's the type of representation that can offer that dangerous acceptance of prejudice, because it's so easy for it to happen. There was a program on Apple TV. They launched it last year. It's fantastic. It's called Visible. It's a 4 or 5 part series that basically looks at the representation of LGBTQ people on the screen. And one of the things that, especially when it comes to the trans community, is when they are used in dramas and TV shows, they tend to either be prostitutes or the first person to be murdered, or the murderer. That's the representation, and you would expect that to have come quite a lot forward, like other members of the LGBTQ plus community's representation has. But realistically, it's not. It's taken programs like Pose and Transparent to actually have an understanding of that issue, but it still gives license to those broadcasters who put those comments together in the form of entertainment outside of context or storyline. And it really upset me watching it, because it's the exact opposite of what we are trying to do as a broadcaster, and what you would hope that they would want to try and do and achieve, as a streaming company.
And I think that, I guess, brings me on to my next point, that to me, that looks like what Netflix are doing is false allyship. They're putting out, okay, we're going to tap into this group, and we're going to seem really, really forward thinking and like an amazing active ally here, but then also we don't want to lose those kind of users, so we're going to have that here. And so that brings me on to my next question. What do you think actually makes a strong ally? Like what are the things that you think exhibit strong allyship?
Well, obviously, as well as watching like Drag Race, if you're not updated with Drag Race, then obviously the conversation is not going to have a conversation with you. No, I mean, there are a lot of, we're really lucky. I am very lucky in the fact that, I am white, I'm middle-aged, I have a good job, and I am a gay man. We used to all be lumped together in those letters. And I think now the divide is not necessarily between you know, the non-LGBTQ and the LGBTQ, it's almost within the letters that are within there. I mean, as far as actually doing stuff, knowing that you can go and ask a question if you don't understand is important, because being able to take part in a conversation that's happening in an office and being able to hear your colleagues talk about stuff like that, it really makes an impact. I mean, from a business perspective, you know, people putting pronouns on their signatures, it's a small thing, but it's almost like it's almost like a silent acceptance and understanding by using it. And I think it should be used by more people, because I think it signals straight off to anyone who you're reaching out to that there is understanding there. But at the same time, to be able to do that and legitimately do that with credibility, there really has to be some understanding. So the first thing I would say is ask questions. Nobody is going to come to you and not respect you if you come from a good place. You know, if you don't understand a term, or you're in a conversation in the office and you didn't quite understand where it left and where it was supposed to go to, asking those questions are a big part. And events. So if you're part of a company that has an LGBTQ plus pillar as part of a D&I program, those pillars are not just for people in the community, they're for everyone. We're running a virtual event at the end of the month to mark the end of Pride Month. That's not going to be targeted towards the LGBTQ plus people in the business. It's targeted at everybody in the business about LGBTQ. So I think it's really difficult sometimes to put into practical terms, what can I do? How can I explain? Can I make it easier? Do I wear a badge? Do I wear a lanyard? Yeah, you can do that stuff. But for me personally and practically, knowing that if a conversation came up in an office, that people around me feel comfortable talking about it, makes me feel like they understand me a bit better. And that's on us all to be able to learn that. And just be visible. You know, no one is saying that you should come in full pride glitter or in drag or anything like that. But you know, it's subtle things that make the difference. And I think that coming from a good positive place in somebody and asking a question and, you know, making yourself part of the conversation, it goes so far for me in highlighting why it, you know, they're on my side. And it shouldn't be like sides, but it kind of always is. You know, you either understand it or you don't, but it's your responsibility to try and understand it. And that's how I see it.
100%. And I think, yeah, the only thing I'd probably add to that is that for people to come to those conversations from a good place, I think it's really good to develop a basic understanding in your own time. I think, of course, it's like amazing to ask questions and find people who are opening to answering those questions, but also there's a wide range of resources out there that if somebody actually wants to be an active ally and you don't understand what it means to be asexual, go and look it up. Go and look up.
It's funny because I think what people think sometimes is that this is once you've learned it, you've learned it. And you know what history has told us. I mean, there are still 69 countries around the world where, you know, LGBTQ people can be imprisoned. 13 of those you can also be given the death sentence. And you know, those figures don't, you know, they don't change. You know, there may be some small movements forward, but the whole progress of the community is changing. So the biggest difference that I feel from speaking with friends and family and colleagues is that the definition of gender has created almost a misunderstanding of what those other letters mean and where they are in context. Because traditionally, you know, man, woman, 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 man, man. There is, you know, it is a very simple thing. And I think trying to understand the fact that you don't define somebody's gender, they define their gender. You basically, it's in the same way you don't come up with somebody's name, they tell you their name. making sure that you're on top of that stuff is a big deal, and it goes a long way. And like you say, you almost have a responsibility to keep that information and keep it up to date. No one's expecting you to get it right 100% of the time. In fact, when it comes to things like gender and that side of the community, that's the area where it's most personal, and knowing that it's personal and that there isn't a right or wrong is part of the solution and understanding it in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, understanding how like fluid it is and how much it's moving and developing and changing, I think, yeah, is so important. I think you're so right. People are so like determined to get these like really black and white answers. And
Yeah.
it's so, because I remember I was explaining to somebody recently, they were asking me a question about trans people, and I was saying, well, first of all, I'm not trans, I can't explain this to you. There's lots of influencers and people online that you can look to, but I think the most important thing for you to understand is that trans women are as different as cisgendered women. Like they're not all like this or all like that. They're all completely different in the same way that cisgendered women are. So I think, yeah, that's an absolutely very, very important thing to understand. And as we're coming towards the end, what would you like anybody watching or listening to this to take away from the podcast?
I think when we were talking before about making a difference, it might, I'd look at that from a different perspective too. So if you've got someone coming to you, if you're in a position of power within a business, or you're a manager of people, knowing that people can feel comfortable as one to come to you and ask for that change or pitch that idea, that suggestion, being able to essentially call it out, and being able to offer that person the opportunity. It's all right saying it's a line of one. Someone can make that first difference. One person can make a big difference, but the actual difference happens when it's reciprocated on the other side, when someone takes what they've been told and takes it seriously. So what I'd say to anybody who's watching now, who thinks that they want to make a difference or make a change, or they think there's something they can do or say that will do that, I would say be brave, do it. You'll never regret not doing it. You'll never regret doing it. You'll never not, it's the hardest step, the biggest step. And for me, having that very first conversation about Hits Radio Pride, I knew that I was respected in the position that I was in and in my true self. And I think what gave me a really, made me feel good was knowing that the person who was listening for the right reasons, and they wanted to make a difference. We've come such a long way as a community. 19, gosh, the age of consent changes everything to gay marriage. Same-sex marriage is now legalized in Northern Ireland, but that only happened in 2019. There's so far that we've come, and I think that the area that I feel is almost the most important part is the representation of gender in women and females, and also trans people as well, because those are the areas that I feel at the moment are the ones getting the most amount of negative feedback. And there's still so much to do. We've come a long way, but we've still got so much that we can do. And anyone can be an ally. If you're part of the community, you already are. Anyone can be an activist. I didn't consider myself an activist. I still don't. I'm just me. And I talk about being me an awful lot. And, it's a personal thing. And it doesn't take you walking marches, standing out in the cold, walking up and down with banners and placards. Yeah, that helps. But there are so many other ways that you can champion the community and feel and be and act like an activist without doing any of that.
Ross, thank you so much for all your
Thank you.
insights, and thank you to anybody listening. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.